Shalom. Welcome to Lessons in Tanya. What is the Tanya and why would we want to study it? That's the first question that probably occurs to you. So let me first begin by explaining what the Tanya is, and then I'll explain why we would want to study it. The Tanya was written by the Rebbe Zalman. The Rebbe Zalman was the first of the 7 Rebbes of the Chabad movement. He was the founder of the Chabad movement. The Chabad movement is the intellectual branch, if you will. It's known as the intellectual branch of the Hasidic movement. And the Hasidic movement, the modern Hasidic movement, was founded by the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov lived in Poland, and the Baal Shem Tov, in around the 15th century, the Baal Shem Tov taught, he lived in a period, let me explain, there's a lot of parallels between the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and the teachings of Yeshua. For one thing, the Baal Shem Tov sought a restoration of Hasidic Judaism. Let me explain what I mean by a restoration of Hasidic Judaism, because most people think that Hasidic Judaism began with the Baal Shem Tov. But in fact, we read in the books of the Maccabees that when Judas Maccabee went off into the wilderness with his brothers and his father, the Maccabees, they encountered a group of Jews living in the wilderness called Hasidim. These Hasidic Jews had left Jerusalem and left the big cities for much the same reason that the Maccabees did, but even earlier, because they could not tolerate the Hellenism and the apostasy that was taking place in Judaism at the time. And they were led by a man named Antigonus of Soko. Antigonus of Soko we read about in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, in Tractate Avot 1:3. And actually the first 3 Mishnot of Tractate Avot kind of lead up to Antigonus of Soko, and then forward, of course. But what we learn is that in the first portion of Tractate Avot is that the Torah was received by Moshe on Mount Sinai, of course, passed to Joshua and on to the prophets, and then eventually the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, it was passed to, the guardianship of the Torah was passed to the Great Assembly. And then we're told about a man named Simon the Righteous, Shimon HaTzadik. He's talked about in the Wisdom of Ben Sirach, chapter 50, also a great deal. And we're told about him that he was of the remnant of the Great Assembly. Now, the Great Assembly apparently ceased to exist when this great apostasy that took place around just prior to the time of the Maccabees, leading up to and ultimately culminating in the abomination of desolation of the altar by Antiochus Epiphanes. And there, of course, Judaism was essentially outlawed, circumcision was outlawed, and so on. And so those that wanted to keep true to Judaism escaped into the wilderness, and they lived as Hasidim under Antigonus of Soko, who was a student of, a direct student of Simon the Righteous, who was of the remnant of the Great Assembly. And Antigonus of Soko's teaching is summarized in the Tractate Avot as saying that we should not observe Torah as one who seeks to be paid or is looking for a reward, but as one who has no mind for a reward. This is in Avot 1:3, I believe. As one who has no mind for a reward. And as a result, our we're not looking to get paid. Okay, this is the foundation of. It's supposed to be the foundation of Pharisaic Judaism. It's the foundation of Hasidic Judaism. It's Chesed-based, grace-based. Chesed means loving kindness, mercy, grace. Okay? And so, this is the teaching of the Hasidim and of Antigonus of Soko. And the Baal Shem Tov sought to restore this teaching. You may also recognize it as the teaching of Yeshua and Paul. We don't earn our salvation. We're not trying to earn a reward. We simply keep the Torah because Daddy asked us to. Because it's and because we're cleaving onto Elohim, and cleaving, devakus, onto Elohim involves these mitzvot. With these mitzvot, we cleave onto Elohim. Okay. So, Hasidic Judaism, when the Baal Shem Tov lived, in Rabbinic Judaism in general, there was a feeling amongst the people, including the Baal Shem Tov, that Judaism was sort of dying on the vine, that it become empty and ritualistic and out of touch with the common man. The debates in the Talmud sometimes were about such mundane matters as how many logs of wine versus how many logs of water were used, are to be used in the water libation ceremony in the temple. Okay, so this is there's no there's sort of a disconnect with the people. The people weren't necessarily concerned in their everyday life with these kinds of matters, and there was another problem in the atmosphere very parallel to the time of Yeshua. Also, and that was that the government was very oppressive, and so there was a great deal of oppression taking place, and there had been a problem with false messiahs, especially one that had just recently been on the scene, that had led a great many people astray. And so also in the time of Yeshua in the first century, there had been a number of false messiahs, the government was oppressive, and there was a feeling that that Judaism was out of touch with the needs of the people. And so there did not there was this need, if you will, for rejuvenation. And so the Baal Shem Tov comes along to restore Chesedism, to restore Judaism to its Hasidic roots. And so that's the teaching of the substance of the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov is another matter we'll get into. But that was the gist of the matter. And of course, if you compare, you find that Yeshua comes to a time period in which is very similar, and Judaism does seem very much out of touch with the people. And Yeshua seeks to reconnect the people with Judaism and to bring a spiritual element and a restoration of Hesed to Judaism, where it's very much like what takes place with the Baal Shem Tov. Now, in the days after the Baal Shem Tov's death, as Hasidic Judaism began to grow, it began to undergo a great criticism. And that criticism was that the Hasidic movement was all just a bunch of emotional hype. Yes, it was not intellectual enough. It was too spiritual and not intellectual enough, and just a lot of hyped up emotion. And so these were the critics. And in response to these critics, the Rebbe Zalman wrote Tanya, the Tanya. And the Tanya was written to give an intellectual basis for Hasidic Judaism. Now remember, there's a strong parallel. In fact, Yeshua was restoring Hasidic Judaism. Okay? That's why Paul writes about grace, chesed. Okay? That's why Yeshua says in Matthew chapter 12, in talking about the Shabbat, he quotes Hosea 6:6, I desire chesed, I desire mercy, loving kindness, chesed, not sacrifice. Not that he doesn't, it's a weight of halakhic issues. And so Yeshua's teaching emphasized chesed, because Yeshua also was restoring Hasidism, okay, or Hasidic Judaism. And so the Rebbe Zalman gives in Tanya an intellectual basis for Hasidic Judaism. And as we will find as we study the Tanya, and let me emphasize, as we do study the Tanya, it is based upon rabbinic texts. It is a text that seeks to apply the Jewish rules of hermeneutics not only the Tanakh, but to the Mishnah, the Talmuds, sometimes the Midrash, the Zohar, and other primary Jewish writings beyond the Tanakh to teach its message. And we may not necessarily agree with everything we read in the Tanya, okay? But as we do read in the Talmud, in Avot, in Avot 4:1, I believe it is, we read that Ben Zoma said, who is wise? He who can learn from any man. In other words, the man who is wise doesn't say, there's nothing to learn from that. The man who is wise takes a different approach, and it's the approach of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, we read in Tractate Hagiga 15, it says of Rabbi Meir that he ate the date and he spit out the seed. That finding a pomegranate, he ate the fruit but rejected the rind. So as we study the Tanya, I'll remind you to be open-minded in the sense that we can learn from any man, even we've done this in our Talmud for Beginners class, for example. We learn from the position that we might find to be in error, because it tells us more about why that position is incorrect. It helps us to understand what the correct position is. It's like the line around a circle tells you as much about the inside of the circle as it does about the outside of the circle. And so we can learn from any man. More importantly, we can eat the date and spit out the seed. We can eat the fruit of the pomegranate and reject the rind. If there's something that we find indigestible, then don't digest it. And but learn from what you can learn from, or what we can learn from. This is a perfectly appropriate thing to do. So, what is the message of the Tanya in general? The overall message of the Tanya is this. As I said, it's a intellectual response to the argument that the Hasidic movement is out of touch with the people. And so in being out of touch with the people, the perception is that, it's an intellectual response to the accusation, not that Hasidim is out of touch with the people, I'm sorry. That was the criticism that the Baal Shem Tov had for the rabbinic Judaism of his day. No, the accusation that Hasidic Judaism was all a bunch of emotional hype with no intellectual basis. And so the argument that Tanya makes is that the joy of Hasidism, the joy that the Hasidic Jew feels when he dances, for example. In fact, there is a story that says that the Baal Shem Tov was asked one day by a heathen, I believe it was, certainly by a non-Hasid. I think it was one of the heathen, asked the Baal Shem Tov, why do the Hasidim dance around with such joy? Is this all the time? Is this the action of a sane person? And the Baal Shem Tov said, he gave an allegory. He said, a great celebrated musician came to a town, and he began to play. And his music was just amazing. And the people of the town couldn't resist themselves. They came into the town square and they began to sway and eventually to dance to the music. It was just such amazing music. And a deaf man came along, and the deaf man saw the townsfolk all wreathing around wildly, dancing in the town square for no apparent reason. And he says, has the world gone mad? Should the people of the town stop dancing? This was the Baal Shem Tov's response. Now, the Tanya gives us Rebbe Zalman's intellectual foundation for this. And what the Rebbe Zalman teaches, as we will find in the Tanya, is that when the Torah, the message of the Torah, which is, by the way, the Messiah is the Torah incarnate, when the Torah enters into our innermost parts, into our hearts, is written in our hearts, as we internalize Torah through studying the Torah, one, through speaking the Torah, and through performing the Torah, doing the Torah, the mitzvot of the Torah. But when we internalize the Torah, particularly through studying the Torah, because then it results and it comes out in our speech and in our actions. But when we internalize the Torah, then we do so through through wisdom, first of all. The Torah is wisdom from Elohim. And so when that wisdom comes to us, then we take that wisdom of the Torah and we subject it to understanding. Understanding is not like wisdom. Wisdom is a flash of insight. Wisdom is just there. In fact, the Hebrew word is chachma. It can mean not just wisdom, but cleverness. It could actually refer to someone who's crafty or has a criminal mind or is artistic, creative. Okay? But when the wisdom there is brought over to understanding, then we really begin to internalize it, we understand it, we comprehend it. Wisdom is complete unity. There is no division within it. It is a complete whole, okay, indivisible. But understanding is essentially logic. Logic gates, for example, in a computer, break things down and it goes X, this way or that way, 0 or 1. And that's what Benoni, understanding is. Understanding then takes the wisdom of the Torah and it breaks it down and it categorizes it and it classifies it and it begins to comprehend it. And then as we comprehend the Torah, it becomes da'at. It becomes knowledge within us. And that knowledge within us, then, the Tanya says that this is sort of like a mother and a father, if you will, to the womb of the mother, and then so the seed coming from the father is likened to wisdom coming to us through our studying of the Torah. And that wisdom then, when we comprehend it, it is like it is gestating in the womb, and it then comes forth as da'at, knowledge, which parallels the son, the birthing of a son. And it is this, the Tanya says, and we'll find out later, that the Tanya says is parallel to why the passage in Exodus 4 talks about Israel being Elohim's firstborn son. Because we have this da'at from studying and internalizing the Torah within us, the sonship within us. Now, it's very important to realize that the Tanya, in doing this, is drawing from the Zohar. And we will discuss that when we get to these sections of the Talmud. We'll discuss this in more detail. But the Zohar teaches something called the three pillars of the Godhead. The Father and the Mother, which parallel the wisdom and knowledge, as well as chesed and gevorah, which are loving kindness and severity. But in this case, we're talking about wisdom and knowledge. And wisdom and knowledge then come together, wisdom and understanding come together to when wisdom is gestated in understanding, it results in da'at, knowledge, which the Zohar draws this parallel also and talks about the Father and the Mother and the Son, and that the Godhead, the three pillars of the Godhead, parallel allegorically, not literally, but allegorically, a father, a mother, and the middle pillar of the Godhead is called the Son of Yah. And so there's a direct parallel between the Tanya's concept here and the Zohar concept that it is drawing from, so that when we study the Torah and we internalize the Torah, then what happens is that the Torah, the wisdom of the Torah then becomes understanding. We understand the Torah, it becomes knowledge within us, and that knowledge within us, that da'at, is the Son of Yah, because it is the Torah internalized within us, and the Torah, the Messiah, is the Torah incarnate. And so we have then the Son of Yah within us. Therefore, we are sons ourselves. Israel, in internalizing the Torah, become the sons and are the sons of Yah as well, because the Son of Yah is within us. Okay? And so then through this da'at, through this knowledge, the Tanya teaches us that there are 7 outflowings, if you will, of emotion rooted in chesed and gevorah, in loving kindness and in severity, that come and flow down from us. And so, by severity, the Tanya refers in this context to the fear of Elohim and the love of Elohim. And so there's this emotional response that naturally results from this intellectualization of Torah. So that as we study the Torah, the Tanya tells us that as we study the Torah, then as we study the Torah, then we internalize the Torah, we take the wisdom of Torah, we understand it, it becomes knowledge, it gestates an understanding, it is born as da'at, as knowledge, as the Son of Yah within us, which is the Torah incarnate. And then through that knowledge of Torah comes an outflowing of emotion. And that this outflowing of emotion, the fear of Elohim and the love of Elohim, and that fear is not fear like, boo, I'm scared. It's fear, it's respect and reverence and awe for Elohim. It's like looking at the Grand Canyon and saying, and saying, oh, it's awesome. How awe-inspiring that is. It's not fear, but it's a healthy respect and a great awe. And it's these are emotional responses. And so the Rabbi Zalman tells us that these emotional responses result from an intellectual process. And then that results in our speaking the Torah and our doing the Torah, as well as meditating upon the Torah in our minds. Okay? And also the Tanya teaches us that as this process is taking place, that this internalization of the Torah, this Son of Yah within us, is effectively a second soul within us that is a spark of the divine. An actual spark of the divine within us. Okay, so you can see that this very, very compatible and very much parallels the teachings we read in the Ketuvim Mitzrayim, the writings of the so-called New Testament, and with the teachings of Yeshua. In fact, there is an interesting teaching of Yeshua that is found in something called the Gospel according to the Hebrews. The Gospel according to the Hebrews, chapter 7, verse 9, in my reconstruction of the Gospel according to the Hebrews. This is a quote from the Gospel according to the Hebrews, is a lost apocryphal gospel that was used by the ancient sect of the Nazarenes. The church fathers, the so-called church fathers, refer to it on a number of occasions as this lost gospel that the ancient sect of the Nazarenes used, and on several occasions they quote from it. And one of the quotes is, "He who seeks will not cease until he finds, and having found he will be amazed, and having been amazed he will reign, and having reigned he will rest." So this is a profound teaching of Yeshua, and it very much parallels the teaching of the Tanya, and by the way, of Chabad. Chabad, the word Chabad, is actually drawn as an acronym from the first letter of the words for wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. In Hebrew, Chachma, Beinah, Da'at. So Chabad actually indicates this process of internalizing the Torah through the three pillars of the Godhead, resulting in the Da'at, the Son of Yah within us, which is, according to the Tanya, a spark of the divine within us. Okay. So, what does Yeshua mean when he says, "He who seeks will not cease until he finds, and having found he will be amazed, and having been amazed he will reign, and having reigned he will rest"? Well, one thing I forgot to tell you is that the Tanya also then goes on to tell us that through this internalization of the Torah and this outpouring into the seven lower emotions, if you will, this internalization of the Torah assists our Yitzer Tov, our good inclination, in overcoming what's called the Yitzer Ra, the evil inclination. Okay? Because there is a conflict which the Zohar the Zohar talks about it too, but the Tanya talks about, which is this great conflict taking place between the Yitzer Ra and the Yitzer Tov. The Yitzer Tov is the inclination to do good, and the Yitzer Ra is the inclination to do evil. And so, through this process, the Tanya teaches us we are able to bring the Yitzer Ra under submission to the Yitzer Tov. Okay, that being said, what does Yeshua mean when he says, "He who seeks"? What he's referring to is seeking the Torah. When we seek the Torah, the wisdom of the Torah is something that we seek. Then when we find that wisdom, we find the Torah, we find it through understanding. So we seek the Torah, we seek the wisdom of the Torah, then we find the Torah when we understand it, when we begin to understand it, and we begin to find the Torah that we seek, if you will. So then we find Torah, and then it says, he will be amazed. What is the amazement? Well, the being amazed is the knowledge of Torah. So you seek the Torah, you find the Torah, and then you're amazed. There's this amazement that comes. Okay? Likewise, the wisdom of Torah then becomes understanding of Torah and then knowledge of Torah. You see the parallel is very clear here. And then it says, in the next line, having been amazed, he will reign. What does it mean to reign? Well, it means to reign over one's Yetzer Hara, one's evil inclination. So through this internalization of the Torah, through the wisdom of Torah becoming an understanding of Torah, and then that becoming the knowledge of Torah, we then become masters over our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination. And then it says, having reigned, he will rest. So there's a Sabbath rest, if you will, to be received within us through a divine rest that we receive through this process of taking the wisdom of Torah, understanding it, knowing it, and then mastering our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, and that brings a peace within us, a rest within us. And so Yeshua was teaching Tanya before the Tanya was ever written. Okay, this is very much the teaching of Tanya and the teaching. Yeshua was teaching Chabad before Chabad existed. Okay, so let us now begin Tanya, chapter 1. And the word Tanya actually comes from the first phrase, the very first word of Tanya. It has been taught, which in Hebrew is Tanya. It has been taught. It has been taught. An oath is administered to him before birth, warning him, be righteous and be not wicked. Even if the whole world tells you that you are wicked, that you are righteous, regard yourself as if you were wicked. Okay, so even if the whole world tells you you're righteous, it says, be righteous and be not wicked. Even if the whole world tells you you're righteous, regard yourself as if you were wicked. Now the context of this is that it's a quotation from the Talmud, from Tractate Nidah. It's actually 30b in the Babylonian Talmud. And what this portion of Talmud is telling us is that before a soul enters into this world, when it's in what's called the goof, the well of souls, before a soul enters into this world, an oath is administered to this soul. And the oath that is administered to this soul is to be righteous and be not wicked. And even if the whole world tells you that you are righteous, regard yourself as if you are wicked. Okay. Now the Tanya continues. This requires to be understood. We've got to understand this, because for it contradicts the Mishnaic dictum, contradicts something in the Mishnah, in Avot, chapter 2. And be not wicked in your own estimation. That's Tractate Avot in the Mishnah, and it's what is the passage? Avot 2:13. So here we have a contradiction within the Talmud. On the one hand, Tractate Nidah tells us, Tractate Nidah says, regard yourself as if you were wicked. On the other hand, Tractate Avot tells us, be not wicked in your own estimation. This is actually it's actually an implementation of one of the rules of Hillel. One of the 7 rules of Hillel tells us that 2 passages seem to contradict one another until a third passage resolves the conflict. Okay, and so here we have, and this is a very common method of rabbinic exegesis. Paul uses it in the first 5 chapters of Romans, as you'll see in my Understanding Paul series. Romans and the Tanya actually open up in very similar manners. So the Tanya begins by introducing a contradiction within the Talmud, or what seems to be a contradiction within the Talmud, because one passage tells us, be even if the whole world tells you you're righteous, you should regard yourself as if you're a Rasha. A Rasha is a wicked man. On the other hand, Tractate of Avot tells us that you should not be evil in your own estimation. Be not evil in your own estimation. How can it be both ways? Not only that, Zalman is going to give us yet another problem. Furthermore, if a man considers himself to be wicked, he will be grieved in heart and depressed, and will not be able to serve Elohim joyfully and with a content heart. While if he is not perturbed by this self-appraisal, it will lead him to irreverence. Elohim forbid. In other words, if we are in fact, if we follow the Tractate Nita's dictum, even if the whole world tells you you're righteous, regard yourself as if you were wicked. Isn't that kind of depressing? I mean, doesn't that create a situation of hopelessness? How can we fulfill the requirements in Torah to serve Elohim with joy in our heart when we believe we're a Rasha? When we believe that we're a wicked man. And that, moreover, no matter what we do, we're still wicked. Okay. However, the matter will be understood after a preliminary discussion. So, Rabbi Zalman, sort of like one of these television shows that gives you a sort of a teaser, a preview. He gets your interest right in the very beginning of Tanya, and he shows that there's a contradiction in the Talmud. Now, you got to understand that from Rabbi Zalman's perspective, he doesn't believe that there's any real contradictions in the Talmud, and his audience doesn't either. So if there's two passages that seem to conflict in the Talmud, there must be something that we don't understand. It's very similar to a teaching in hermeneutics that says that if you understand one passage in such a way as, it's called the analogy of Scripture, if you understand one passage in such a way that contradicts another passage, you're misunderstanding one or both of them. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the Talmud is Scripture. What I am saying is that he's applying hermeneutics to the Talmud. And so he's saying, we have one passage that conflicts with another passage. They shouldn't conflict. So what that tells us is we don't understand something about one or both of these two passages. And so the Tanya is going to help us understand. It's going not to be until, I believe, chapter 13 before the Tanya actually explains this apparent contradiction. So after he whets your appetite and gets you wondering and gets your mind running, well, how, what, I don't understand, this is great. Let's put that on the back burner. Don't forget that. Let's put a pin there. And let's talk about something else. We find in the Gemara 5 distinct types. The Gemara is essentially means in the Talmud. The Talmud, if you're taking my Talmud for Beginners, if you're watching my Talmud for Beginners series, then you'll see that the Talmud is made up of two parts, the Mishnah and the Gemara. We find in the Gemara 5 distinct types. A righteous man who prospers, a righteous man who suffers, a wicked man who prospers, a wicked man who suffers, and an intermediate one, a Benoni. The Benoni is a key figure in the Tanya. The Benoni is the average man. It is therefore explained that the righteous man who prospers is by the way, this is referring back to Barakot 7a, I believe. Is it yes. Barakot 7a, and also Rosh Hashanah 16b in the Babylonian Talmud. So here's where we man who suffers, the righteous man who prospers, the wicked man who suffers, the wicked man who prospers, and the Benoni, the average man, the man in the middle, I like to call him. Okay? It is there explained that the righteous man who prospers is the perfect tzaddik. A tzaddik is a righteous man. A rasha is a wicked man. A tzaddik is a righteous man. The righteous man who suffers is the imperfect tzaddik. In Raya Mehemna, on Parshat Mishpatim, this is in the Zohar, by the way, is a reference to the Zohar. It is explained that the righteous man who suffers is one whose the evil nature, whenever you hear like evil nature, evil inclination, the Hebrew is going to be Yitzer Ra. And likewise, when you hear good inclination or good nature or good something similar to that, it is going to be good nature. It's going to be the Yitzer Tov. Okay? If one whose evil nature, whose Yitzer Ra, is subservient to his Yitzer Tov, to his good inclination, and so on. In the Gemara, at the end of chapter 9 of Berachot, it is stated that the righteous are motivated by their good inclination. A righteous man is motivated by his Yitzer Tov, his inclination to do good. Okay. And the wicked by their evil nature, their Yitzer Ra, their inclination to do evil. While the intermediate men are motivated by both. Okay, so the man in the middle, the average man, the Benoni, he is, it's like, the cartoon with the devil and the angel on the guy's shoulders, He's got two voices trying to influence him, an inclination to do evil and an inclination to do good. And, sometimes he may yield to one voice, or another, but he's got both voices. That's the important thing here. He has both voices that are trying to influence him. While the intermediate are motivated by both and so on. Rabbah declared, I, for example, am a Benoni. So Rabbah said, I'm a Benoni. I'm an intermediate man, one of these average men. Said Abaye to him, Master, you do not make it possible for anyone to live. And so on. This is, by the way, drawing from the Babylonian Talmud still, again. So Abaye says to Rabbah, you don't make it possible for anyone to live. Now, there's different interpretations as to what Rabbah meant by that. But basically he was saying, if you're an average man, you're not a tzaddik.
New message from 9016.
If you're just an average man, then if you're an average man, then how can anyone how can anyone live? How can anyone have life? You make it impossible for anyone else. Surely you're a righteous man. Surely you're a tzaddik. Surely you're not a Benoni. If you're not a Benoni, not a tzaddik, who is? To understand all the aforesaid clearly, an explanation is needed, as also to understand what Job said. In Baba Batra, okay, this is in the Babylonian Talmud again, in Nida 12b. Job says, Lord of the universe, you have created righteous men and you have created wicked men. For it is not preordained, now that's the end of the quote from the Talmud. Now Rabbi Zalman speaking. Rabbi Zalman says, for it is not preordained whether a man will be righteous or wicked. Which is also in Nida 16b. In fact, the statement from Job is Baba Batra 16a. The statement, it is not, the idea that it's not ordained whether a man will be righteous or wicked is in Nida 16b. And again, it won't be until chapter 13 before all this gets resolved, but there's this conflict that is created because on the one hand, we're told that Elohim creates the righteous and the wicked. On the other hand, it's not foreordained whether a man will be righteous or whether a man will be wicked. In fact, free will is foundational to Judaism, certainly to Pharisaic Judaism. Now, the Essenes, not with the Essenes, the Essenes were big on predestination. Josephus writes about the Essenes. He says, the sect of the Essenes affirmed, this is in Antiquities 13:5-9. He says, the sect of the Essenes affirmed that fate governs all things, and that nothing befalls men, but that is according to its determination. And in fact, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is a lengthy discussion. Let's see if I have it here. There's a lengthy discussion in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yes, I have it in my notes. So we'll get to it later. But there is a lengthy discussion in the Dead Sea Scrolls about the predestination of man and how that ties in with the impulses within man. Okay. However, writing about the Pharisees, Josephus writes in Antiquities 18:1-3, when they say that all things happen by fate, they do not take away from men the freedom of acting as they think fit, since their notion is that it has pleased Elohim to mix up the decrees of fate and man's will so that man can act virtuously or viciously. Okay, so Josephus says the Essenes, they believe that everything is just a matter of fate, period. But the Pharisees say no, not really. That Elohim hasn't decided whether a man's going to be righteous or unrighteous. That a man can act virtuously or viciously because he has free will to make his own choices. And this is also taught in the Babylonian Talmud, actually in the Mishnah, in Tractate of 3:16, where it says, all things are foreknown, but free will is given. And let me elaborate on where this concept of free will, because it is really closely tied to this inclination to do good and the inclination to do evil, which we've been talking about in Tanya. In the Wisdom of Ben Sirach, chapter 15, this is in the Apocrypha, the Wisdom of Ben Sirach, chapter 15. Now, Ben Sirach wrote before the time of the Maccabees, but after the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, during the Alexandrian period. And he was the leader of the yeshiva. Okay? So this is his teachings, if you will, to his yeshiva students that he left behind, written in his book. And it's called The Wisdom of Ben Sirach. It says, chapter 15, verses 11-20, say not you, it is through the Lord that I fell away, for you ought not do the things that he hates. Say you not, he has caused me to err, for he has no need of sinful man. The Lord hates all abomination, and they that fear Elohim love it not. He himself made man from the beginning, and left him in the hand of his free will. Now, let's actually look at this in the word for free will there in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew text it says, and he left him in the power of his own inclination, his own yitzer. That's the word there. The word for free will there is yitzer, his own inclination. If you will, you can keep the commandments. And to act faithfully is a matter of your own choice. He has placed before you fire and water. Stretch out your hand for whichever you wish. Before man is life and death, and whether him likes shall he be given him. For wisdom of the Lord is great, and he is mighty in power, and beholds all things, and his eyes are upon them that fear him, and he knows every work of man. He commanded no man to do wickedly, neither has he given any man license to sin. So Ben Sirach says, man has been given a yitzer, an inclination. But within that inclination, there are two inclinations. An inclination to do good, an inclination to do evil. And there is yitzer ra and yitzer tov, and the two inclinations are battling for us. Okay, but we make the choice as to which inclination to follow. And we'll talk more about that as we continue our study of Tanya later. Back to the text of the Tanya. It is necessary to understand the essential nature of the rank of the intermediate, the Benoni. So Rabbi Zellman says it's very important at this point to understand what a Benoni is. Surely that cannot mean one whose deeds are half vicious and half sinful, for if that were so, how could Rabbah err in classifying himself as a Benoni? How could Rabbi, if a Benoni, if half of his deeds are evil and wicked, how could Rabbah have mistaken himself for a Benoni? Because the Talmud regards Rabbah as a righteous man. Certainly not as one whose half of his deeds were evil. And if half of his deeds were evil, how could he even imagine himself? How could this be? It's not possible. For it is known that he never ceased studying the Torah, so much so that the angel of death could not overpower him. There's a story in the Talmud, in Bava Metzia 86a, that says that when it came time for the angel of death finally to take Rabbah, that he couldn't, because Rabbah spent all of his waking hours studying Torah. He didn't even violate the mitzvah that's of studying Torah, of taking, there's a teaching that says that if you neglect the opportunity to perform a positive mitzvah, that's a sin against the Torah. And so if you have a spare moment, you should be studying Torah, because it's a mitzvah to study Torah. So we should be studying Torah whenever we have some spare time. Now, some might take that too far. I think that Elohim didn't mean for us to study Torah and not have any recreational time. Certainly you also have to have time with our families and so on. But Rabbah, all of his spare time, he loved Torah. It was his hobby too. He studied Torah all the time. And the angel of death couldn't take him while he was studying Torah. This is just according to the story in the Talmud. Okay? And so, according to the story, the angel of death created a distraction, some shaking and some bushes, and Rabbah was distracted from his Torah study for just an instant, and the angel of death was able to take him then. How then could he err to have half of his deeds sinful? How could he be a Benoni? How could Rabbah be a Benoni? If a Benoni is a man whose half of his deeds are sinful. Furthermore, at what stage can a person be considered a Benoni? When a man commits sins, he's deemed completely wicked. In other words, as soon as you commit a sin, you're completely wicked. You're a rasha when you sin. But when he repents afterwards, he's deemed completely righteous. Paul talks about that. Even he who violates a minor prohibition of the rabbis is called a rasha, as it is stated in Yevamot chapter 2 and in Nidah chapter 1. Moreover, even he who has the opportunity to forewarn another against sinning and does not do so is called a rasha. So we're also a rasha if we see that a person's about to sin, we don't say, oh, you shouldn't really do that because. And I'm not talking about being a jerk or calling someone out publicly. I'm just saying, if we have the opportunity, or for, to warn somebody that something, maybe they don't realize it's going to be a sin. And we don't. Then it's on us. All the more so he who neglects any positive Torah, any positive law which he is able to fulfill. For instance, whoever is able to study Torah and does not. So, it's not possible that a Benoni would be a person whose deeds are half evil and half good. This brings us to Revelation 3:15 through 16. I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. It is right that you be neither cold nor hot. And you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, and I will vomit you from my mouth. So Elohim is not interested in, if a Benoni is in fact one whose deeds are half good and got 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Half the time he's doing the right thing and half the time he's doing the wicked thing. That can't possibly be what a Benoni is, because Yahweh hates that. No interest you would have no interest in a Benoni. You would be very unhappy with the Benoni if a Benoni was a man whose deeds were half wicked. Continuing in Tanya. Regarding whom our sages have quoted, because he has despised the word of the Lord, of Yahweh, that soul shall be utterly cut off. It is thus plain that such a person is called wicked more than he who violates a prohibition of the rabbis. If this is so, we must conclude that the intermediate man, the Benoni, is not guilty even of the sin of neglecting the study of the Torah. Hence, Rabbah could have mistaken himself for a Benoni. In other words, Benoni has to be somebody that Rabbah could have mistaken himself for. An intermediate man has to be can't be somebody who's lukewarm. It's got to be something more than that. And there's a note here. It says, as for what is written in the Zohar, volume 3, page 231, he whose sins are few is classed as righteous, the righteous man who suffers. This is the query of Rav Hamuna to Elijah. But according to Elijah's answer, Eliyahu answers him and says, the explanation of a righteous man who suffers is as stated in the Zohar, in Raya Mahimna, which is given above, and the Torah is 70 facets, modes of interpretation. In other words, that was what Rav Huna was asking, but Elijah's answer was different. And so we're sticking with what the Tanya says, is basically what Elijah said. Okay, continuing in Tanya. As for the general saying that one whose deeds and misdeeds are equally balanced is called Benoni, while whose virtuous outweighs his sins is called a Tzaddik, this is only the figurative use of the term in regard to reward and punishment, because he is judged according to the majority of his actions as is deemed righteous in his verdict, since he is acquitted in Torah. So it's saying, all right, in common language, we might use the term Benoni, an intermediate one, might be used to refer to a man who has some wicked deeds and some evil deeds. But we're looking at a higher meaning here, is what I'm going to say. But concerning the true definition and quality of the distinct levels and ranks, righteous and intermediate men, our sages have remarked that the righteous are motivated solely by their good nature, by the Yitzer Tov. As it is written, and my heart is void within me. This is actually, my heart is void within me, is actually from Psalm 51. And it's actually from King David in reference to the Yitzer Ra. There's a strong connection between the Yitzer Ra and what Christians call original sin. And when Christians talk about original sin, they actually point to Psalm 51:5. And Psalm 51 is actually a psalm that talks about the Yitzer Ra and the Yitzer Tov, and that is recognized here in the Tanya. It is recognized in the Zohar, and it says, behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother. Okay, but that phrase, in iniquity and in sin, can mean with iniquity or with sin. So it could be read in the Hebrew, behold, I was shaken with iniquity, and with sin did my mother conceive me. In other words, with the Yitzhak. Okay? We read in 2nd Esdras, in the Apocrypha, 2nd Esdras 3, 23-26. It says, and yet took you not away from a wicked heart, that your Torah might bring forth fruit in them. And yet you took not away from them a wicked heart, that your Torah might bring forth fruit within them. For the first Adam, bearing a wicked heart, transgressed and was overcome, so be all they that were born in him. Thus infirmity was made permanent, and the Torah also in the heart of the people with the malignity of the root, so that the good departed away, and the evil abode still. This is the creation, if you will, the implementation of the Yitzhak. So the times passed away, and the years were brought to an end. Then did you arise, you up a servant called David, whom you commanded to build a city unto your name, and to offer incense and oblations unto you therein. When this was done many years, then they inhabited the city, forsook you in all things, and did even as Adam and in all generations has done, for they also had a wicked heart. Okay, so here we have again the Yitzhak. The Talmud talks about these two inclinations, by the way. The foundational text in the Talmud is referring to Genesis 2:7, where the word Yitzhak is spelled with two Yuds. And so there's a drash on, if you will, in the Talmud, in Babylonian Talmud 61a. Rabbi Nachman ben Rabbi Hizada responded, what is meant by the text when the Lord God formed Vayitzar man? The word Vayitzar, because Yitzhak can also mean to form, in Genesis 2:7 is written with two Yuds to show that Elohim created two inclinations, one good and the other evil. So remember this word Yitzer that Ben Sirach said, we have a Yitzer, which is our free will, but we have two inclinations. We have two Yitzers. We have the inclination to do good and the inclination to do evil. And also in the Babylonian Talmud, Berachot 61b, it has been taught, Rabbi Joseph the Galilean says, the righteous are swayed by their good inclination, as it says, my heart is slain within me, Psalm 109:22. The wicked are swayed by their evil inclination, which the Tanya has mentioned, as it says, transgression speaks to the wicked, methinks there is no fear of Elohim before his eyes, Psalm 36:1. Average people, Benoni, are swayed by both inclinations, as it says, because he stands at the right hand of the needy to save him from them that judge his soul, Psalm 109:31. Rabbah said, people such as we are of the average. This is the text that Tanya has been discussing, by the way, where Rabbah says, I'm a Benoni. People like us are Benoni. We have both voices. Paul talks about these two conflicting movements, two conflicting voices within us in his writings. In Romans 7, verse 14, for we know that the Torah is of the Spirit, but I am of the flesh, and I am sold to sin. And then in verse 22, for I rejoice in the Torah of Eloah in the inward part of the Son of Man. This section we'll talk about when we talk about understanding Paul, and more as we talk about the Tanya, is talking about this conflict between the inward man and the flesh. 2 Corinthians 4:16, because of this we are not wary, for even if our outer man is corrupted, yet that which is inside is renewed day by day. And Galatians 5:17, for the flesh desires a thing which is opposed to the Spirit, and the Spirit desires a thing that is opposed to the flesh, and the two of these are opposed to each other, that you do not do the thing which you desire. So we are, we have both voices going on within us. We are Benoni. All right. And that's who the Tanya is written for. It's written for the Benoni, the average man, the man that has the evil inclination speaking within him and the good inclination debating within him. So back to Tanya, it says, that is, speaking of Psalm 51, here it says, my heart is void within me, meaning that that his Yetzer Hara was void within him. In other words, David had overcome his Yetzer Hara. That is void of an evil nature because he, David, had slain it through fasting. But whoever has not attained this degree, even though his virtues exceed his sins, cannot at all be reckoned to have ascended to the rank of the righteous. That is why our sages have declared, as in the Midrash, the Almighty saw that the righteous were few, so he planted them in every generation. For as it is written, the Tzaddik is the foundation of the world. So he planted Tzaddikim in various generations, scattered them like seeds through the generations, because there weren't that many going to be that many of them. The explanation of the question raised above is to be found in light of what Rabbi Chaim Vital wrote in Sha'ar HaKedusha, that in every Jew, whether righteous or wicked, are two souls, as it is written, the Neshimot, the souls which I have made. This is a reference to Isaiah 57:16, which says, for I will not contend forever, neither will I always wrath, for the spirit that enwraps itself from me, and the souls which I have made. Souls in the plural, indicating two souls or more. I have made, alluding to souls. There is one soul which originates in the Khalifa and the Sitra Achra, which is clothed in the blood of a human being, given life in the body, as it is written, for the life of the flesh is in the blood. This is, the Khalifa is the darkness that surrounds the light in the universe, if you will. So there's one soul, this animal soul, that's closely tied to Yetzer Hara, that is within a man, that is formed from darkness. From it stem all the evil characteristics, because from the four evil elements which are contained in it, these are anger and pride, which emanate from the elements of fire, the nature of which is to rise upward, the appetite for pleasures from the elements of water, for water makes to grow all kinds of enjoyment, frivolity and scoffing, boasting and idle talk. From the element of air, the sloth and melancholy, from the elements of earth, from this soul stem the good characteristics which are to be found in the innate nature of all Israel, such as mercy and benevolence. Chesed. For in the case of Israel, the soul of the Khalifa is derived from Khalipat Nogah. That's a special kind of Khalifa. Khalifa, I said, is darkness, but Khalifa are actually, the Klipot are actually shells of darkness that surround light. And the idea is that the shells of darkness have to be broken, cracked, to get to the light inside. And all the light in this universe is really concealed in shells of darkness that must be cracked open. And so what Tanya tells us here is that the souls of Israel come from Klipot Nogah, which are there. It's a very thin shell of darkness, which has a lot of light inside. Okay, so more light than darkness in the soul of the Jew, which also contains good, as it originates in the esoteric tree of knowledge of good and evil. The souls of the nations of the Goyim, however, emanate from the other unclean Kelipot, which contain no good whatsoever, as it is written in Eschayim, that all the good that the nations do is done from the selfish motives. So that the Gemara comments on the verse, the kindness of the nations is sin, quoting from Proverbs, that all the charity and kindness done by the nations of the world is only for their own self-glorification, and so on. A lot of things I need to talk about here. First of all, because of this text, the Tanya has been accused of being racist. The Tanya is not racist because, from the Tanya's perspective, a Jew is not a racial thing. A Jew, when the Tanya talks about a Jew, it is like a Baptist preacher talking about a Christian. When the Tanya talks about a Jew, it's talking about one who follows Judaism. Okay, so the Tanya does say that there are two kinds of souls, two kinds of animal souls in the world. And we're talking in chapter 1 primarily about the animal soul. We did mention and touch on a second soul, and we'll talk about that more in our next lesson. But our primary text here is talking about the animal soul and the conflict between the two. And you'll recall that we talked earlier about the conflict between the two in Paul's writings. And we talked about how in the wisdom of Ben Sirach says that man has been given a Yitzer, and the Yitzer, also in the Talmud, is an inclination. It's a free will. It's an inclination. It's an inclination to do good and an inclination to do evil. There's a lengthy statement here in the Manual of Discipline in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I'm going to read it out to you and go over it in its entirety and study it with you, if you will, because it's directly pertinent to what we read about in the Tanya. And so what we'll find is that what the Tanya is saying reconciles Essene predestinationism, if you will, with Pharisaic free willism. Okay, so, and we're reading from the the Manual of Discipline, column 3, line 17 through column 4, line 26. Now this Elohim created man to rule the world and appointed for him two spirits, after whose direction he was to walk until the final inquisition. These are the spirits of truth and falsehood. We can equate these with the Yitzer Ra and the Yitzer Tov now, can't we? The inclination to do good and the inclination to do evil. The origin of truth lies in the foundation of light, that of falsehood in the wellspring of darkness. All who practice righteousness are under the domination of the Prince of Lights and walk in the ways of light, whereas all who practice perversity are under the domination of the angel of darkness. However, even those who practice righteousness are made liable to error. All their sin and their iniquities and their guilt and their deeds of transgression are the result of his domination, and this, by Elohim's inscrutable design, will continue until the time appointed by him. Moreover, all men's afflictions and all their moments of tribulation are due to this being's malevolent sway. All the spirits that attain over him are built on causing the sons of light to stumble. By the way, the sons of light is a term that's used in the Ketuvim Netzarim by Yeshua and Paul to refer to the Nazarenes. Howbeit, the Elohim of Israel and the angel of his truth are always those to help the sons of light. It is Elohim that created these spirits of light and darkness and made them the basis of every act, the instigators of every deed, and the direction and directors of every thought. The one he loves for to all eternity is ever pleased with its deeds, but any association with the other he abhors, and he hates all its ways to the end of time. This is the way those spirits operate in the world. The enlightenment of man's heart and the making straight before him of all the ways of righteousness and truth. The implanting in his heart of fear for the judgment of Elohim, of a spirit of humility, of practice, of abundant compassion, of perpetual goodness, of insight, of perception, of that sense of the divine power that is based at once on an apprehension of Elohim's works and the reliance on his righteous mercy, and of a spirit of knowledge and informing every plan of action, of a zeal of righteous government, of a hallowed mind and a controlled nature, of abhorring love for all who follow abounding love, for all who follow the truth. A self-respecting purity which abhors all the taint of filth. Of a modesty of behavior coupled with a general prudence and an ability to hide within oneself the secrets of what one knows. These are the things that come to men in this world through communion with the Spirit of truth. And the guardian of all that walk in its ways, its health and abundant well-being, with all the fruition of seed, along with eternal blessing and everlasting joy and life everlasting, and a crown of glory and a robe of honor amid light perpetual. But to the spirit of falsehood that belong greed, reminiscences of right doing, wickedness and falsehood, pride and presumption, ruthless deception and guile, abundant insolence, shortness of temper, and profusion of folly, arrogant passion, abominable acts in a spirit of lewdness, filthy ways in the cauldron of unchastity, a blasphemous tongue, blindness of eyes, dullness of ears, stiffness of neck, and hardness of heart, to the end that a man walks entirely in the ways of darkness and evil cunning. The guardian of all who walk in such is multitude of afflictions in the hands of all the angels of destruction, everlasting perdition through the angry wrath of an avenging Elohim, eternal horror and perpetual reproach. The disgrace of final annihilation in fire, darkness throughout the viciousness in life, every generation doleful, sorrow, bitter misfortune, and darkling ruin ending in extinction without remnant of survival. So these are the bad guys. The sons of darkness and the sons of light. Their destinations being contrasted here. He goes on. It is to these things that all men are born. It is to these that the host of men are heirs throughout their generations. It is in these ways that men needs must walk, and it is in these two divisions, according as a man inherits something of each. So a man inherits some light and some darkness. That all human acts are devised throughout all the ages of eternity. For Elohim has appointed these two things to obtain an equal measure until the final age. So the manual of discipline is saying that in this world there's this equal conflict, if you will, of good and evil taking place. The resolution won't come until the very end. Between the two categories he has set an eternal enmity. Deeds of falsehood are an abomination to truth, while all the ways of truth are an abomination to perversity. And there is a constant jealous rivalry between the two regimes, for they do not march in accord. There's a war going on between light and darkness, between the Yitzer Ra and the Yitzer Tov. Howbeit, God, or Elohim, in his inscrutable wisdom, has appointed a term of existence of perversity, and when the time of inquisition comes, he will destroy it forever. Elohim has appointed a short time for wickedness to exist, and then he's going to destroy it. Then truth will emerge triumphant for the world, albeit sowing itself in the ways of wickedness owing to the domination of perversity. Then also Elohim will purge all the acts of man in the crucible of his truth, and refine for himself all the fabric of man, destroying every spirit of perversity from within his flesh, and cleansing him by the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, for all the effects of wickedness. Like waters of purification, he will sprinkle upon the Spirit of truth to cleanse him all the abominations of falsehood and all pollution through the spirit of filth, and the end, that being made upright, men may have understanding of transcendent knowledge, and the lore of the sons of heaven, and that being made blameless in all their ways, they may be endowed with inner vision. For them has Elohim chosen to be partners of his eternal covenant, and there shall be mortal glory, falsehood shall be no more, and all the works of deceit shall be put to shame. The destruction of the Yetzer Hara, basically. And then the final paragraph I want to cover here. Thus, for the spirit of truth and falsehood have been struggling in the heart of man. Men have walked both in wisdom and folly. If a man casts his portion with truth, he does righteously and hates perversity. If he casts it with falsehood, he does wickedly and abominates truth. For Elohim has appointed them in equal measure until the final age, until he makes all things new. He foreknows the effect of their works in every epoch of the world, and he has made men heirs of them, that they might know good and evil. But when the time of inquisition comes, he will determine the fate of every living being in accordance with which of the two spirits he's chosen to follow. And so we have here a basis for reconciling free will with predestination, to the degree that, yes, each man is, as we read here in the Manual of Discipline, this concept that when Elohim made man, he put some darkness into, and he put some light in, and depending upon how much darkness or how much light a man had in that animal's soul, there was a predisposition. But Elohim didn't choose for him. There's a Yetzer Ra and there's Yetzer Tov, and some may have a stronger Yetzer Ra, some may have a stronger Yetzer Tov. Okay? What the Tanya teaches is that people who become Jews, whether they're born a Jew or whether they become a Jew, whether they convert to Judaism or become a proselyte Jew, from the Tanya's perspective, because these are people that have a stronger Yetzer Tov in their animal soul. Okay? That's what they tend to be. And so there is a concept in Judaism that sometimes you have a man born a Gentile who's born with a Jewish soul, and that's the person who converts to Judaism, as we read in Esther 8:17, become Jews. Okay? And so when the Tanya talks about Jews, it's not just talking about people who are born Jews. That's not what it's talking about, because there's some people who are born Jews who are apostatized from Judaism. There are also people who are not born Jews who embrace Judaism. And so these people have, if you will, Jewish souls. And this is what the Tanya discusses. Okay, that's it for chapter 1 in our first lesson on Tanya. I hope you'll join us again in the future for lesson 2 on chapter 2 of Tanya. Until next time, shalom.